What? Why? I mean, so much bound up in the job, but it's not the be-all and end-all of anybody's existence, particularly a relatively junior role. You know, if somebody were to walk away from that now, they might be preferred in future administrations. They'd go down in history as the person who was responsible for lancing the boil, for beginning the process of removing the cancer. But I don't know. Julian Suffolk puts it better than I just managed. She says a righteous resignation used to improve someone's long-term career prospects. I mean, if you think things can't get any madder, I saw Nigel Farage on Twitter this morning complaining about the state of British politics, which is, not unlike one of the nastiest skid marks in the history of humanity, complaining about the state of the national underpants. But we are where we are, introducing him into the public sphere, allowing him to be treated like an honest broker or a trusted tribune was in many ways the beginning of the corruption that we're witnessing now at the very highest levels of government. When you let racism and lies invade public discourse unchallenged, when you treat them as balances to anti-racism and truth, then you create holes through which all manner of ugliness can rush. And there's little uglier than the current administration in Downing Street. That clip from earlier this morning at the top of the show, Stuart's call, which has excited an awful lot of you, and many people who missed it responding to social media descriptions of it. It is now up. It is now live on LBC's Twitter feed and indeed on mine at Mr. James O.B. One of the most remarkable calls I think I've ever taken on the radio, and yet also completely, what's the word I want? Not inevitable, because I think Stuart had to sort of gird his loins before picking up the phone. Again, as with Simon MacDonald, it's not normal behaviour, but how do you approach abnormal misconduct? You can't deal with abnormal misconduct through normal conduct. You need abnormal good conduct to battle abnormal bad conduct. So phoning a radio station, being a watered-down version or a less impactful version of writing to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. But there it is. I mean, truly incredible. What's the word I want? I mean, it was shocking but not surprising. It was amazing but utterly plausible. What would you do if you were in a role like his? What would you do if you were working with these truth twisters? What would you do? Where can you go? The system hasn't given them a outlet, I think is the word that I would use. It's very nearly coming up to 12 noon. I'm going to park it there. I would bet my bottom dollar on Sheila Fogarty and Eddie Mair returning to this territory over the course of the afternoon on LBC. But I am going to move on, not least to leave them with some room, if you like, to discuss it rather than filling my boots for 3 hours. And what I'm going to move on to next is a story that I am really keen to hear from you about. You can tell by the slight croak just creeping into my voice that I've done a little bit more talking than usual, even over the last 2 hours, even against the backdrop of brilliant calls. So Starmer on Brexit. I'm not going to overcomplicate the question. I'll probably do a bit of an introduction, but I could spare you that, to be honest, if you picked up the phone and called in now in answer to this question. Has he got it right? Is this the right call, the right path for Keir Starmer's Labour Party to follow with regard to Brexit? It's 3 minutes after 12. Do you know what else I could have done? I might do this hour. I might do it by text or tweet or calls. I mean, if you had to pick a member of the current cabinet who might find a backbone, which one would you pick? See, I still, and I know every single time I say something even vaguely warm about a Conservative MP, or particularly a senior Conservative MP, it becomes like a curse, the curse of O'Brien. But I still think Sajid Javid might find some cojones. I don't know. Who would you go for? Just text that to me and we'll keep a little tally on it, because they will be keeping track of today's programme. I can tell you that for nothing. Well, who do you think? If any member of cabinet who might... So you can find the ones that have never had a backbone and will never find one, like Rees-Mogg, and I must play you a little bit more of Andrew Marr's interview with Jacob Rees-Mogg from last night as well, because it's almost as if the mask has now slipped or the game is up. Kirsty Walk on Newsnight completely rinsing him of the ludicrous claim that we couldn't have done what we did with vaccines if we'd still been in the European Union. That's a lie, a blatant lie. Andrew Marr pushing him on the question of whether or not Brexit has increased or decreased the amount of red tape for our exporters, and Jacob Rees-Mogg wriggling, desperately wriggling in an attempt to avoid answering the question, hiding from the truth, running from the truth. So, some people are backbone-free zones, always have been, always will be. Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think it would probably be an exaggeration to describe him as a vertebrate. So he's not coming into this game. Who might? First 2 votes in, Nadhim Zahawi and Rishi Sunak. Okay. I don't know enough about Zahawi, to be honest with you. You can't bring back Rory Stewart, for heaven's sake, and don't be ridiculous. George Eustace, ex-UKIP, unbelievable. Well, I suppose if it's self-interest that we're looking for rather than backbone, the calculation, you might be right. I'll have a little look at that in just a moment. And a nice one in now for Ben Wallace. Gove the opportunist. Again, if you're suggesting it's opportunism that would prompt that decision, then I don't know if that qualifies as backbone. And Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who is currently riding high in the... stop trolling me with Nadine Dorries. Mark in Norwich says, Nadine Dorries, by mistake? Question mark. I've actually come on holiday by mistake. 6 minutes after 12. Right, on to Starmer. 2 hours on the leader of the Conservative Party. Time now for the leader of the Labour Party, who I think in normal circumstances would have been right under the microscope this morning. And indeed, when the newspapers went to the press last night, he was under the microscope, because yesterday was the day that he essentially pledged to not abandon Brexit, promising to alter Brexit, not abandon it. And the amount of coverage that might have ordinarily received has, of course, been absolutely diminished by the latest despicable revelations about what Downing Street considers to be acceptable behaviour. So, 2 distinct audiences. So there are Labour voters who deserted the party in 2019 because they backed Boris Johnson's pledge to get Brexit done. But then there's the internal audience as well, what you might describe as the pro-European audience, whether members or activists or both, they want to keep the door open for a return to the EU fold. The weirdest thing, perhaps, about Starmer's position, when you look at it from a distance, is that Brexit is falling apart. Whether you are comfortable with that conclusion or not doesn't bother me. It's just true. Those are the facts. It may not be permanent. Listen, it may be that after a period of decline and self-imposed harm, we can somehow build something or do something that we couldn't have done while in the European Union. I can't currently see it myself, unless somehow trading with countries on the opposite side of the world is going to prove to be even better than having free and frictionless trade with our nearest neighbours. But hey-ho, let's be, open-minded about it. But you've got 54% of people that think Brexit is going badly at the moment, which at first glance would make you think that the Labour Party pledging to stick with Brexit, not abandon it, is bonkers. But I said to you yesterday, and I've been thinking about it since, you've got to break that 54% down. That is not 54% of people who think that Brexit was a terrible mistake. It's 54% of people who think Brexit is going badly, which is going to include everybody who knew it was going to go badly and lots of people who thought it was going to go brilliantly but think that it's only going badly because it hasn't been done right yet, which is when little, weasels like Farage come crawling out of the woodwork to claim that if only we believed more, or if only we'd been even more ridiculous or even more stupid, then things could somehow have gone better. The number of us who knew that this was inevitable does not add up to 54%. Far from it. So I don't know if it is as immediately foolish as it may appear. 31% of Leave voters, for example, think that Brexit is going badly. 31% of Leave voters think Brexit is going badly. God knows what the other lot think, if indeed they ever think at all. But it doesn't mean that Keir Starmer should pledge to reverse it in any way, shape or form. And that is, of course, the decision that he's taken. Britain will agree to follow EU food safety and agriculture standards rules under a Labour government. That's a big thing. It may not sound like a big thing, but in terms of detail and actual lived experience as opposed to rhetoric and argument, that's a big deal. It should never really have been on the table. It's a stupid move to withdraw from EU food safety and agriculture standards. The regulatory alignment that we enjoy with our biggest customers and our biggest vendors should never have been put up for negotiation. It should always have been a given. Of course, that would not have allowed the headbangers to talk nonsense about freedom. freedom from decent rules and regulations. So it's incredible. It's like somebody driving 150 miles an hour around the M25, smashing into everything he comes into contact with, shouting about freedom from speed limits. That's pretty much what the ERG and fellow travellers have been reduced to. He will not try to rejoin the EU or negotiate membership. What's the calculation here? Pretty simple. He wants to spike the Tory guns. Whoever he fights the next general election against, if he's still in the job himself, they will claim that the calculation is that Keir Starmer will want to, that telling voters that Keir Starmer wants to reverse Brexit, the calculation is that will do him electoral harm. Brian Cox, not the bloke in Succession, the genius scientist, said something very clever this morning on Twitter. I didn't hear his interview with Chris Moyles on Radio X, but I know that Chris very kindly lobbied Brian to come on my podcast as soon as possible. But Brian Cox said something which hadn't actually occurred to me until I saw it written down, and it's what is the calculation behind this move that they have taken? And Brian suggests it must be data driven. In other words, the strategy must be data-driven because it accepts that in today's world, politics is about doing what small groups of swing voters want rather than making an argument that there's a better way. I'll read it in its entirety. Regrettably, I understand what Labour are trying to do here, presumably a data-driven strategy, I hope. Regrettably, because it accepts that in today's world, politics is about doing what small groups of swing voters want rather than making an argument that there's a better way. That's really depressing, actually. It's really regrettable, isn't it? If the calculation is, if to increase our chances of winning the general election, we have to pander to a small number of changeable minds, people who can be persuaded to vote for us, but will need a promise that we won't do what would be best for the country, which is to rejoin the single market, or even, if they'd have us, the European Union. So that's the calculation. There are 5 other areas, or rather 4 other areas that make up the so-called plan. I'll run you through those as well. Agreeing a deal or pursuing a deal over the Northern Ireland Protocol sounds to me like so much hot air. I don't really see how that is immediately achievable, but at least promising to try to secure a deal is better than promising to take your ball home, as Boris Johnson has done. So settle the Northern Ireland Protocol. And then you've got the veterinary agreements and the food agreements, which would, of course, help solve a lot of the Northern Irish problems. Support services and scientists, again, a little bit vague. Seek a security pact, that's a good idea. Invest in the UK, no one's ever going to campaign on not investing in the UK. And this is the key, not seeking to rejoin the single market or restore free movement. That's the bit right there. That's the kicker, right? That is going to have an awful lot of remainers or rejoiners or whatever you want to call them, us. That's going to have a lot of us feeling a bit dismayed. But dismay married to acceptance or not? So that's it, really. Should he have done this? Should Keir Starmer have pledged to not seek membership of the single market or restoration of free movement? Should the leader of the Labour Party, did he get it right or wrong yesterday when he promised no attempts to join the single market, no attempts to restore freedom of movement of people? For you and for me, for our children, but also, of course, for our European neighbours as well into this country. Did he get it right or did he get it wrong? And you know how this programme works. I will need a bit of why, not just what. Did he get it right or did he get it wrong? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who it's aimed at. I don't speak to these people. I don't know that I ever did. I used to speak, as you know, to really gammony Brexiters, people who couldn't really explain what their support was built on because they were terrified of admitting that it was always racism, and that was great for viral clips and everything always fell apart and hey-ho, here we are. But the people who still think that all of this damage, all of this harm, all of this international shame is a price worth paying to keep out mythical Romanian builders? I mean, do they actually exist? Do they actually exist? Calculation is that they must. Brian Cox says that must be where the data is coming from, and he's a clever lad, that Brian Cox. I don't know. And I don't know whether he's got it right or not. I found myself on the way home yesterday thinking, how would you feel if he'd said what Sadiq Khan said to you at the O2 last Tuesday? If he'd actually said, of course we must be trying to join the single market, rejoin the single market. How would you feel if Keir Starmer had said that? Answer, I don't know. And what would it have done politically? He's not saying Brexit was the right thing to do. He clearly isn't saying that. But he's saying it's been done and it can't be undone. Right or wrong? Nice simple question for you. Hit the numbers now. You might get through. Let's crack straight on, shall we? There's an urgent question in the House from Angela Rayner about, I imagine, Chris Pincher, so we may take that as well. So less of me, more of you on the Starmer question. Ian's in Bristol. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I think Keir's got it completely wrong, to be fair.
Go on.
I've spoken to you before. I was one of the people that voted for Boris, voted Conservative, voted for Brexit, and I've done a complete turnaround. I think if he said we're going to take us back into the way it was,
really,
then I would vote for him in a heartbeat, 100%.
But he's trying to. I mean, listen, don't take this the wrong way. He's trying to clean up your mess.
Yeah, I know, absolutely, and we need someone to do that, don't we?
Well, I don't know that there's enough people who've seen the light as you have. He has to clean up your mess and the mess of people who haven't seen the light. How's he going to do that? By keeping you happy?
Yeah, I think the thing is, you have to look at us. If you ask the population and go, how's this working for you? Are you thriving? Are you prospering? Is everything going really, really well for you? If you get anyone that actually, apart from multi-millionaires, that says, yes, brilliant, it couldn't have gone better, this is exactly what I'd imagined. Yeah. If you can find a handful of people, then congratulations. I think the reality is everyone's going to go. Yeah,
but it's facts really versus feelings again as well. I won't dig into what made you vote the way that you did in 2016, but it wasn't really facts and evidence that drove a lot of votes towards Brexit. It was feelings. It was feelings of, I don't know, fear or patriotism, bogus patriotism or whatever. And that doesn't change regardless of how bad the economic... And a lot of people are still denying the economic damage or trying to pin it on COVID or Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, it's a mix, James, I think. So the reality was, this story is actually really related to the previous one as well, because we were lied to massively.
But you can admit it, and Starmer's trying to win your vote and the vote of people who haven't admitted it yet. That's the problem.
Well, unfortunately, he's not going to do it if he says to stay in, which leaves us in a really horrible situation.
To stay in Brexit,
correct? Yeah, because who can I vote for? Well, and that is some of the problem. We're all stuck. We've got no one that we can vote to, and we've got a broken system.
That's a horrible call, man. That's a really horrible call for someone like me to take, because there's no fun and there's no point in I told you soing or gloating or even celebrating the fact that you've seen the light, because we're all in this together, literally. And yet you don't think that the leader of the opposition's carefully thought out attempt to minimise the damage and move forward is a big enough solution to the mess that you helped make, and I say that with a modicum of affection. I didn't make this mess. Sean's in Frome. Sean, what would you like to say?
Well, I think he made the wrong call, James.
2 out of 2.
Really disappointed, and I don't understand why he didn't just stick with the ambiguity.
He can't campaign on ambiguity because it leaves the door wide open for Johnson to accuse him of wanting to rejoin. He either has to say yes or no to that accusation.
I don't see that. There's not an election due possibly for another 2 years. So they're
expecting one in December, apparently. I mean, before the Pincher thing blew up, the whispers were that they think he might call one in December. They're getting on an election footing. They might. I mean, they might be wrong to do that, but it answers your question of why now.
Well, I can see what I can see what he's trying to do. He's looking at the red wall constituencies and he's trying to bring those back in to vote Labour.
Yeah.
But I think at the moment I'd draw the analogy of a tsunami, effectively, that the waves out at the moment in respect of Brexit, and we haven't felt the consequences yet.
Yeah.
But when wave comes hammering back in, I think there'll be a lot of people who will change their vote.
Okay, right. I understand you a bit better. So when you say ambiguity, can I change that to a watching brief? So he should have inserted an "at the moment" or something like that to say, look, it's not going well. We think we can make it better. But obviously, if the current direction of traffic continues, then we will have to have a good, long, hard look at doing things like Sadiq Khan and Tobias Ellwood have suggested.
Yeah. I mean, as your last caller said, all he succeeded in doing with the position he took yesterday is slam the door on all those people who would have voted Labour but who want to leave that option.
I don't know. That's why I'm pinning it all now, all my hopes, on Brian Cox being right and this being data-driven, this actually being a calculation about who is winnable and what is movable and minds that are changeable. And as you talk about the red wall, I don't know if you voted Labour all your life. You fell for Brexit, so you voted for Johnson in 2019, or you were so turned off by Corbyn in 2019. Is this going to tempt you back? I suppose him not being Corbyn would be enough to tempt you back. Then why torch the Brexit policy that pretty much all of your supporters would have preferred to see? All of your established and current supporters answered because the country voted to leave, and at some point you simply have to respect that. No one could accuse Keir Starmer of not having done his best to get a second referendum or to measure twice, cut once, but we are where we are. 12:21 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Have a little listen to this. I don't know if we'll hear all of it, but this is the reality of Brexit, as even one of its most enthusiastic, albeit utterly clueless cheerleaders now has to acknowledge.
Let me ask you this. If I'm an exporter to the EU, has bureaucracy, has red tape increased, decreased, or stayed the same as a result of Brexit?
But we're opening up trade deals with the rest of the world.
Well,
so we are looking, but I'm telling you that we are looking to Australia and
New Zealand. Because the honest answer is increased, hasn't it?
The EU doesn't want to buy our goods. I mean, this is a matter for the EU.
It's kind of a big matter for us too, if we're trying to sell them.
The EU wishes to harm its own consumers, but we're looking at the broader global markets. So we're reducing red tape in relation to other countries. And that's really important. We could get a trade deal with India by the end of this year.
Well, let's hope we do. But
that is more than 1 billion people. That's a really fantastic opportunity, which we couldn't do in the EU.
So the question was pretty straightforward here from Andrew, as ever, as you'd expect. Will British exporters have more or less bureaucracy in exporting to our biggest market? I don't know if he got an answer. Let's tune back in.
Own body, your people.
And it's not our people, it's independent.
Well, I know, but
you can't call it my people.
You set it up. They're all your lot, basically.
Well, that's like saying the BBC's our lot, because it was set up by government.
You can hear his relief here at having spotted a red herring that he can pretend matters instead of answering the question.
Productivity and GDP is going to be 4% lower than it would be if we had stayed in the EU.
When did the ABR ever get a forecast right in its whole history?
Every budget is built upon forecasts.
They haven't got a single forecast right.
So why not abolish them?
What a very interesting idea.
They're a waste of money in that case. You should abolish them.
That's a very interesting idea.
Are you in favour of it?
It's a matter for the Chancellor. But the ABR's got every forecast wrong. Every single one. It has not managed to forecast what will happen in the following year from one budget to the next. So you do have to wonder.
Should abolish budgets next. So no answer at all, even for a grand inquisitor like Andrew Marr. On the question of whether or not British exporters exporting to the European Union have got more or less bureaucracy. Because you know the answer, I know the answer, he knows the answer, the world and his wife knows the answer. It's got much worse. Businesses have already gone bust. Trade has been hugely damaged. But so India and Australia may somehow fix the problem. And so here we are. Why has Starmer pledged not to try to get back into the single market? Ian's in Livingston. It's not looking good for him. Ian, what would you like to say?
Totally agree with that particular analysis, James. The minister for the 18th century there, giving it large
18th, that's kind.
About forecasts being wrong. Yeah, the forecasts are inherently wrong, but they provide you with a direction of travel. There was a column in The Observer this weekend, I think it was Will Hutton, saying that the balance of payments is now the worst since 1955 when records began. And there's an impending crisis because of the weakness of sterling. We can't trade our way out of this because we don't have a trading relationship with the EU anymore like we did back in the 70s. And the other issue being as well, because of the weakness of the pound, everybody's thinking, fuel or the price of crude's gone down.
So what should he have done then? What should he have done? Just said, of course we're going to try to rejoin the single market because we're not mad.
Yes. Facts in detail.
So none of us know this. We're all talking about what we would want to see. And with respect, the first caller was the most interesting because he bloody voted for this mess and now he's giving Keir Starmer a hard time for not cleaning it up completely. That's the problem. How many people... I just can't buy the constituency, Ian. This election-winning constituency of people who don't want to join the single market but could be persuaded to vote for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. He could have got this horribly wrong, couldn't he?
Yes, and speaking as a Scot, I think he's massively alienated the Scottish vote as well.
It's the Union next. He's torched everything else he's ever touched, hasn't he? It's the Union next.
Exactly. I mean, the EU's not perfect, right? But it's your biggest trading bloc, so why wouldn't you want to have a relationship with them? Why would you just...
I don't know. I mean, he's not saying we're having no relationship. I mean, I think
it's not going to be the same as it was, though, right?
No, but he can't do it the same as it was without the freedom of movement element. And it's all very well talking about trade, but a lot of the people who voted for Brexit, you can call them racists if you want. You don't have to. I will. They voted to abolish freedom of movement because they're massive racists, and there's millions of them.
Exactly.
And he needs their vote.
Well, these people will start feeling the pinch when they can't afford food or there's no food left to get.
There's fruit rotting in the fields. There's businesses that can't open. There's staff shortages everywhere you go. There's signs in every window you walk past. But still, it's the right idea to keep those pesky foreigners of Nigel Farage's fevered imagination out of this country. And Starmer's bought into that, hasn't he? Up to a point, I think. All right, I'm shifting then. It's the problem with Twitter is I'll be held hostage to what I tweeted yesterday for the next 10 bloody years. But I'm shifting. I think he might have got it wrong. But then what would happen? Who's going to call me and say, OK, Starmer announced yesterday we're going to rejoin the single market. Johnson activates the red wall. All the old racist tropes come out because that would involve restoring freedom of movement. And now I'm talking myself back out of it again. OK, I'm not even 52-48 now, I'm 50-50. And in fact, each call, if anyone's in support of it, it's probably going to nudge me back in the opposite direction. 27 minutes after 12, Amelia is in Hereford. Amelia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm, again, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
And I would never gather my wits to call you because English is not my first language, so I'm absolutely terrified. Be kind to me, please.
Don't be ridiculous. Absolute nonsense. You're doing brilliantly. Thank you for calling me.
Thank you. I'm a Pole who has come to this country 18 years ago, and I have become a British citizen as well. And I'm a political animal, so I love my politics. I vote since I have become eligible to vote. And I believe I'm a natural Labour voter. But unfortunately, Labour Party does so many things that regularly they put me off voting for them.
Right.
And that one, the last one, is basically something that I'm not quite sure if I will be able to vote for the Labour Party in the incoming election. And I will have to think really, really hard about it. Because I don't believe that it is the right decision, basically, on Keir Starmer's part to be so firm on the subject. I'd like him really to sit on the fence a little bit longer.
Well, you're the second caller to say that. If he sits on the fence, on the fence, then he can be accused of planning to reverse Brexit. And the calculation is that will do electoral damage. It's not going to do any damage to your vote. You're going to be sitting there hoping it's true. So Johnson says he wants to reverse Brexit. And you go, I blooming well hope so, and so does James. But lots of people still don't...
being accused about all sorts of things, even if whatever he does, you know how it works. If he's done, if he does, he's done if he doesn't. So I think that firm decision to say, oh, we are not going to rejoin the single market, that is so damaging to our country, to our economy. And, you know, to me personally, it hurts. It hurts me so badly. It hurts me, literally. It feels like a slap again on my... Because Brexit felt very personal to me, as you can imagine.
Of course.
And now hearing Keir Starmer basically appeasing again the racist voters, saying, "Oh yeah, you were right, voting for Brexit." And I feel.
But what if that's the only way
really
he can win? What if
devastated.
that's the only way he can win an election?
I do understand it. I do totally appreciate it. But him being such a smart, principled, clever man, I think he could have been more, I don't know, diplomatic about it. He didn't have to do it this way.
No, I hear you. I mean, I do. It must be very personal for you when the freedom of movement question comes in. Thank you, Emilia. Thank you for your kind words. Can I read you? Are you still there?
Yes, I am.
I'll read you a little text from Lee. I don't know Lee's background or his family tree, but I think he's English born and bred. He's just texted to say she speaks better English than I do.
Oh my God, that's so kind. Thank you very much.
So take that away. 12:31 is the time. I do want to hear the urgent question, I think, in the House of Commons, but we'll take the latest headlines first with Emilia Cox. 12:34 is the time. I think Angela Rayner is due to get to her feet any moment now to ask an urgent question in the House of Commons. The man currently on his feet is Chris Bryant, actually, who is sitting next to Jess Phillips. And all three of those have featured on my full disclosure series of interviews. Let's see what Chris Bryant is saying, actually.
On the allegations that were substantiated while he was Foreign Secretary at the Foreign Office against the Honourable Member for Tamworth were untrue. Has he had further conversations with the Prime Minister, and is that still his position?
I'd say to Donald, that's not what I said.
Whoa, I played you the clip of him essentially saying that earlier. I might stay here, actually.
Mr. Speaker, could I have a reassurance from Her Majesty's Government that any proposal for an independence referendum coming forward from the Scottish Government...
No, we won't. Keep an eye on that. As soon as Angela Rayner gets to her feet, the decision we've taken is that we'll cross live, which means we'll probably come back to Starmer tomorrow, because I'm not going to be able to get through anywhere near as many calls as I would like. But Nick is in Wimborne first. Nick, what would you like to say?
James, great to talk to you again. Very difficult subject, but listen, I'm more of a Remainer, I think, than you. To be honest, I really am.
Be careful, you'll have the Daily Mail parked outside your house if you say that again. You can't. How can you be more of a Remainer than me? Go on, carry on.
Well, let's just have a score draw. But the fact is, at the end of the day,
yes,
at the end of the day, it hurts me to hear Labour talking in this way, because look, I'm the unrepresented. Half the country, let's face it, wanted to remain, But, and here's the big but, after the referendum, they published a map of the entire UK showing what would have happened if the referendum was held on an electoral ward basis.
Oh, hang on. My apologies, Nick. I'll come back to you after we've heard from Angela Rayner and indeed the response from Dominic Raab.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to ask the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster if he will update the House on the mechanisms for upholding standards in public life.
Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to appear before you and this House on this important matter. And, Mr. Speaker, we are fortunate in this country to have a sophisticated and robust system for upholding public standards. And the system is multifaceted. It is made up of interlocking and complementary elements. It is, of course, founded on the 7 principles of public life, which have been in place for a quarter of a century, and which provide the overarching qualities and standards.
Bit of a damp squib so far. I'm just going to wait to see if Rayner comes back at him.
Have some time to run through all of the mechanisms that underpin the 7 principles, but I'll touch on something else first, and that is this. And it is something with regard to the potential victims in any case where there are allegations of impropriety of any sort. I was a barrister in criminal practice for 17 years before being elected to this House, and I know how difficult it is for individuals to come forward. It is very important that we do not prejudge any individual case. It is also right that the system that, after all, this House created, and relatively recently, namely the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme, is allowed to work its course. Mr. Speaker, there are additional rules and guidance to help ensure consistency of approach. For example, in relation to public appointments, corporate governance and business appointments, when individuals move to roles outside of government. And, Mr. Speaker, there are independent bodies that provide a broad oversight of standards.
The Right Honourable Lady, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, has asked about the mechanisms for upholding those standards, and they exist as a result of the decisions of this House. There are bodies and there are office holders with a role in overseeing specific aspects of public life, such as the Parliamentary Commissioner on Standards, the Civil Service Commission, the Commissioner for Public Appointments, and alongside these there are regimes for the publication of government transparency data and information on those who lobby government. So we do have a Parliament, Mr. Speaker, as you know, that upholds standards to cover all of those in public life. But it is incumbent upon us not to prejudge these decisions. Ministers, public office holders, officials in all of their activities must maintain the confidentiality of those who wish to make complaints across the lifetime of their involvement. But let me say that no system can replace the fundamental importance of personal responsibility. We all know this to be true. Codes and rules and oversight bodies are there to guide us, but we all ultimately, in public life, must choose for ourselves how to act.
We now go to Angela Rayner.
Okay, we'll just see what Angela Rayner has to say now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but this constant charade just will not wash. These latest disturbing allegations about the ministerial misconduct are all about abuse of power. And there is one common fault, Mr. Speaker, with the system currently that the Minister spoke about, and that's the power that's granted by this Prime Minister. The Minister spoke about personal responsibility. Well, the Minister needs to remind the Prime Minister of his personal responsibility. Last week, the Prime Minister said that he knew nothing of specific allegations about misconduct by the member for Tamworth. Then he claimed he had only been aware of reports and speculation. But, Mr. Speaker, the truth is out today, and that defence has been completely blown apart. Lord MacDonald says the Prime Minister was informed about the complaint that was upheld of inappropriate behaviour against the then Minister. Does the Minister here accept Lord MacDonald is telling the truth? Or is he telling us the Prime Minister wasn't aware of it? What happened to the complaint, Mr. Speaker, and why was nothing done at the time? A Minister of State at the Foreign Office has a deeply sensitive role in national security. Was this issue even raised or brought up in the vetting process, and was the Prime Minister informed? And why was this conduct not considered a breach of the ministerial code? Why did the Prime Minister allow him to stay in post? This goes to the heart of wider issues here, Mr. Speaker, and the public have had enough. Since the resignation of yet another of the Prime Minister's ethics advisers last month, there has been an even bigger ethical vacuum in Downing Street, with no accountability in place. How can the Minister come here today and say that this simply just wouldn't happen again? The Prime Minister was personally informed about these allegations, and yet he was either negligent or complicit. What message, Mr. Speaker, does this send about the standards of this government and what they set? What message does this send to the British people facing a cost of living crisis while their government is paralysed with scandal? When will this Minister stop defending the indefensible and say enough is enough?
Minister Ellis.
Mr. Speaker, the matter of what happened with regards to the member for Tamworth is now under investigation. And it is possible that a police investigation may follow. So it is clear that the sub judice rule should apply to individual cases, both because of the interests of justice to everyone concerned, both to those accused and those who are potential victims. So the sub judice rule should apply very much to this debate.
I don't know that that's true. Sub judice generally refers to under judicial consideration, and there's no judge currently involved in this process. So
are subject, of course, to
on we
advice,
go. This is shameful.
On matters of propriety, not to veto, but they are subject to advice. And in addition, the usual reshuffle procedures were followed by government. I asked the House to accept that, bearing in mind the member in question had been reappointed to government by a previous Prime Minister in 2018.
Obviously, I've got pictures in front of me and you haven't, so allow me to tell you, you can see this now, soul seeping out of his eyes as he speaks.
In February, I doubt whether anyone could, in knowledge of those facts, say that this Prime Minister should have acted otherwise than he did. It is the morally fair thing to do in any case. It is the morally fair thing to do in any case to assess the situation based on evidence, not unsubstantiated rumour. It's incumbent on all of us in this House, as it is in society generally, to act fairly. If there is no evidence at the time, if there's no live complaint, no ongoing investigation, surely it is not unreasonable to consider making an appointment. Now, I have made some initial inquiries subject to, this is subject to further assessment, but in the limited amount of time available, my understanding is as follows. In October 2019, officials raised concerns with the Permanent Secretary concerning the member in question. The Permanent Secretary commissioned work to establish facts. That was undertaken on his behalf by the Cabinet Office. This exercise reported in due course to the then Permanent Secretary, who had agreed its terms. The exercise established that while the Minister meant no harm, what had occurred caused a high level of discomfort. This is what the exercise established. The Minister apologised, and those raising the concern accepted the resolution. The Prime Minister was made aware of this issue in late 2019. He was told that the Permanent Secretary had taken the necessary action. No issue, therefore, arose about remaining as a minister. And last week, when fresh allegations arose, the Prime Minister did not immediately recall the conversation in late 2019 about this incident. As soon
I have to tell you, I didn't realise my mic was live at that point. That was what you might call a red button moment there. Keith, be careful. I nearly swore.
Corrected their public lies.
I knew it was
so
on
the
for that
position is quite clear. Further inquiries will be made, but the position is that the Prime Minister acted with probity at all times. It is not appropriate, whether in private life or in public life, to act on unsubstantiated rumour.
They did that with the wallpaper, didn't they?
We now come to the Chair of the Committee, William Bragg.
Wow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend mentions the sophisticated and robust systems for upholding standards in public life, but those systems are, on the whole, irrelevant if the participants have no regard for them.
It's a Conservative MP,
The question that faces the government, and I would suggest my honourable and right honourable friends sat on the front bench, and I notice a greater degree of propensity of government whips rather than other ministers at this time.
Interesting.
Is for them to consider what they are being asked to say in public,
here it is,
which changes seemingly by the hour. And I would ask them to consider, Mr. Speaker, the common sense of decency that I know the vast, vast majority of them have, and ask themselves if they can any longer tolerate being part of a government which, for better or worse, is widely regarded of having lost its sense of direction. It is for them to consider their positions. This is not a question of systems. It is a question of political judgment, and that political judgment cannot be delegated.
Minister.
Well,
here he comes again.
My honourable friend is quite wrong. The fact of the matter is, this is a government that knows its direction, and that is to serve the British people in dealing with the issues that matter to them, including cost of living, the crisis in Ukraine and those other issues, including the pandemic, which this Prime Minister and this government have dealt with in an exemplary fashion.
Come to SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Well, here we are again, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Minister for Defending the Indefensible is sent out to defend his boss, but even he must realise the speed at which we reconvene in this place to question the veracity of the Prime Minister's
I don't
version
think
of events.
there is much
It's like
purpose
being
to
on a
be served by
merry-go-round,
listening
a
to
merry-go-round
Michael
which gets
Ellis's
faster and faster.
contortions
Today
and
it's the
writhings
result
in defence of the indefensible. You want to see Raab or Johnson accounting for the behaviour of Raab and Johnson, not this little squealer, who I presume is banking on a knighthood because, good grief, you'd need a fairly big carrot being dangled in front of you to even contemplate going down such a shameful path of dissembling and borderline deceit, wouldn't you? Hey-ho. An investigation upheld the complaint. Mr. Pincher apologised and promised not to repeat the inappropriate behaviour. That is the words verbatim of Simon MacDonald, who was Permanent Under-Secretary at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office at the time. I'd also have to remind you that Pincher has resigned already as Deputy Chief Whip over whatever happened at the Carlton Club last week. So if you're familiar with the phrase, there's no smoke without fire, then you'll be a little bit confused as to what that man, Michael Ellis, was just trying to argue. I know I am. Catch up with what Chris Bryant had to say as well, I think, after this. 12:52 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where, I mean, it's hard to keep up, and trying to do it without LBC's political editor Theo Ushwood is even harder than it would, well, considerably harder than it would be with him. Theo is off all week, actually, and I can tell you in a world exclusive, he's currently kicking himself for taking this week off. But I'm off next week, and history has taught us that when I take time off, massive events happen in the world of British politics. So fear not, Theo will be here, along with a glittering array of holiday cover to steer you through the events of next week. But this week's full disclosure, if you haven't heard it yet, is a little bit special. It features Chris Bryant and stories, I mean, bits about his life I knew nothing of at all. Personal heartbreak and trauma, but also some incredible, I won't like this, but I can see he's still sitting in the House of Commons, so he won't hear it, sort of against all odds type triumphs and some amazing sort of career path points that I knew nothing. I didn't even know he'd been a vicar. It's a brilliant full disclosure, and I mention it only because Chris Bryant has been on his feet in the House of Commons today, and this is what happened.
The Justice Secretary said this morning on television and on radio, on the basis of conversations that he'd had with the Prime Minister in the last 24 hours, that Lord MacDonald's claim that the Prime Minister had been directly and personally informed and briefed in person on the allegations that were substantiated while he was Foreign Secretary at the Foreign Office against the Honourable Member for Tamworth were untrue. Has he had further conversations with the Prime Minister, and is that still his position?
I'd say to Honourable Gentleman, that's not what I said.
Right. I've got the quote from 10 to 8 this morning. I don't know which interview it was in, but he said, I have discussed this with the Prime Minister over the last 24 hours. It is not my understanding that he was directly briefed. 12:45 today, so 20 minutes after Raab said that's not what I said? Less than 20 minutes, 10 minutes. Raab was speaking at about 12:40? 5 minutes. Any advance on 5? Do I hear 4? 4. Any advance on 4? 3 minutes. Cabinet Office Minister Michael Ellis admits that the PM was briefed. So listen to the Bryant exchange again. It may be that in the weeds, Raab will say, no, the briefing I was denied that happening was actually a different briefing about a different substantiate. Also, does anyone else hate the way he said substantiated? I went to public school. I've never heard anyone say substantiated. It reminds me of, do you know the toast stuff? I told you the toast story about when I started at prep school, and my dad, who was Leeds born and bred, stepped into the headmaster's kitchen for some breakfast after dropping me off, and his wife asked him whether he wanted any toast. And my dad said, pardon? And she said, would you like any toast? And my dad did what was very diplomatic as a great journalist. He always learned the tricks in these sort of situations. He said, well, I'll have some if you're having some. And she gave him a slice of toast. Anyway, here's the Brian. You make of it what you will.
The Justice Secretary said this morning on television and on radio, on the basis of conversations that he'd had with the Prime Minister in the last 24 hours, that Lord MacDonald's claim that the Prime Minister had been directly and personally informed and briefed in person on the allegations that were substantiated while he was Foreign Secretary at the Foreign Office against the Honourable Member for Tamworth were untrue. Has he had further conversations with the Prime Minister, and is that still his position?
I'd say to Honourable Gentleman, that's not what I said.
And I've double-checked this as well. Listen, I'm sorry, Nick. I know you were in your pomp and Ian was waiting to speak, and then Liz and Colin and others. We'll get back to Starmer tomorrow, I promise. Because I've double-checked this as well. But Michael Ellis, I can't believe I'm about to say this out loud, but again, it worked with the wallpaper. Do you remember? Boris Johnson claimed that he'd lost his WhatsApp messages and he'd forgotten about asking a Tory donor to pay for his £7 gazillion a roll wallpaper when they were doing up the flat. Michael Ellis just confirmed that Boris Johnson was told about the 2019 incident, but he forgot. I think that's the defence. Sheila Fogarty will be picking up the baton in a minute. My apologies if I've misconstrued what I've been listening to in the last 20 minutes, but I'm pretty sure I just heard Michael Ellis claiming that Boris Johnson was told about the incident, which is a direct contradiction of what every minister from the Deputy Prime Minister down has been sent into studios to defend over the last 4 days. And the defence now is that, oh no, he was told, but he forgot. Tomorrow, I fully expect Michael Ellis to stand up in the House of Commons and say, actually, there was a briefing, but it went to a different school. I think that's pretty much where we are now. That's astonishing, isn't it? And of course, that becomes the "it wasn't me" defence yet again. It's just gone 12:58. I'll just read you in farewell today the crucial paragraphs of this letter from the former permanent secretary to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, because I don't think it can be driven home enough. The original number, especially given what you've just heard, the original number 10 line is not true. And the modification is still not accurate. Mr. Johnson was briefed in person about the initiation and outcome of the investigation. There was a formal complaint. Allegations were resolved only in the sense that the investigation was completed. Mr. Pincher was not exonerated. To characterise the allegations as unsubstantiated is therefore wrong. But they're still doing it. What happens next? What will we be talking about at 10 o'clock tomorrow? There's only one way to find out. I'm James O'Brien. This is LBC. Here's Sheila Fogarty. 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 Here's